Hello, everybody, and welcome to another adventure in history. Hope that everybody's doing well. Hope that you're having a good day. I've got a little bit of sinus stuff going on, so I probably sound a bit funny, but we're going to soldier forth regardless. So I'm gonna say hey to everybody that's already in chat. Matt, welcome in, and thank you so much for the resub and for being Spartacus. Sohn is here. What's going on? Welcome. Moose, good to see you. Bloodbender, I saw that you followed a few days ago, but I don't think I've greeted you in chat yet, so welcome to chat. Hope that you're doing well. Chris, good to see you as always. And I hope that everybody's doing okay. So, what's up, Silver? We're being visited by the puppy. Hello, puppy. Look, there's a puppy. Hello, puppy. As soon as I started talking back here, she decided that she needed to come check on me to make sure that I'm not going crazy. You know, the weird human that sits back and talks to the light box. Ah, Steve, yeah. I've known Steve for a long, long time. He's a good friend. He says very nice things about me, and I can't say that I disagree with all of them. I think he probably gives me a bit too much credit, but this is Kaylee. She is the mascot of chat. She's got to come back here and make sure that I pay attention to her a little bit because, you know, I came back to the back and she was up on front on the couch snoozing. All right, so that's the puppy. She's a big mess. You hit it when you get, yeah, man. It started back when we had this cold snap, this really big cold snap that ended up dropping it down into like the 40s, and then it went right back up to the 90s, and that's what started it, and then it has sort of spiraled / snowballed from there. I've been sleeping better, and I've been making a point to try to eat healthy and get some exercise. So it has been lessening in intensity, but it's obviously still there, right? I know that I sound funny. But anyway, so what we are doing and what we have been doing for the past couple of months now, which is kind of crazy, is we are actually not rerunning, but like redoing basically older episodes of the show. I have started moving all of my VODs from Twitch to YouTube, and in the process of doing so, I have discovered that I missed quite a few episodes saved. Or rather, I didn't save as many of them as I thought that I did. So we are going back through and redoing these episodes as a way to fill in the gaps so that the playlists on YouTube can be complete. And tonight we are going to revisit one of the earliest viewer request streams that we did. A timeout occurred? I have no idea what that means. Oh, it's everywhere. Super. Has anybody ever seen this before? Apparently my Streamlabs is just borked. Okay. Not sure exactly what that was, but hopefully it's okay. I got it to go away, so we'll see if that pops back up later on, but oh well. Anyway, tonight we're going to talk about samurai. And samurai are obviously a very popular topic, and on a personal level, I'm a big fan of samurai stuff. This is absolutely one of my kind of favorite topics to talk about. So I'm actually a little bit excited to get back to talking about them on chat. And what's going to be really interesting and beneficial for this version of the stream is that when I originally did this stream back in the very early months of 2021, I did not have as many really cool pictures as I have now. In the fall of last year, I was able to go to a really cool exhibit that had just absolute tons of samurai armor in it. And I was able to get a lot of really cool pictures that we're going to look at tonight, and that are going to, I think, really enhance the quality of this stream as opposed to the original version of it. So pretty excited about that as well. So if we are talking about samurai, where are we going to begin? Well, obviously we're going to start with where the samurai came from, right? What were the origins of them even being a thing in the first place? This actually goes pretty far back into Japanese history. It goes all the way back into the 700s. In the year 702 in Japan, there was a big set of reforms that were pushed through called the Taiho reforms. And these are mostly going to be aimed at rearranging the social structure of Japan. And this was an attempt, without going into too much detail, to try to curb some of the more powerful families by creating a military structure that could kind of rival some of the social and family clan structures that had grown up to be very powerful. And what this is going to do is establish a new type of social hierarchy that's based on wealth and service levels in the political structure. And in that class structure, we're going to see our first mention of a samurai. And this was, in the sort of grand scheme of things, kind of a middle management position. It was the sixth one down from the top out of about 14 total ranks. So it's not really low, but it's not also super high. It's just kind of there in the middle. And this is an attempt, again, at just sort of reorganizing how everything was going to be put together. But what this does is it creates a group of people inside of Japan that have a little bit of disposable income and are able to save a little bit of money. And that means that they're going to be able to live a little bit better than the average person. And effectively speaking, this is going to start creating what looks like a little bit of a proto-middle class in Japan. Now, let's be very clear. The middle class that we have in America today is actually a lot smaller than a lot of people think it is. It's only like 30% of the population. But this sort of proto-middle class that I'm talking about was a fairly narrow cross-section of the population. The vast majority of people in Japan were quite poor, and then you had a very small crust of very, very wealthy individuals. So what we're talking about here is a small population of people that have a little bit of money, right? They're not going to live in a gigantic palace in most of the situations. They're just going to kind of have really cool houses, right? So these are going to be the people that afford the pool in the backyard, if you get the reference here, right? And they're not like even in the above ground pool, they have like the in-ground pool. So these people have a little bit of money. They're not super fabulously wealthy, but they're getting by and they're capable of expressing some level of political power. Now, with the reorganizations, there's going to come a lot of change. And by the time we get to the late 700s, we're going to run into this guy. And this guy is a dude named Emperor Kanmu. And Kanmu has a bit of a... I don't know, what are we going to say here? This guy has ambition, right? This guy has ambition. And one of the things that he really wanted to do was expand the territory that answered to the emperor. at the time, in the particular parts of Japan that we're talking about, the emperor was really only going to control sort of the southern part of the main island of Honshu here, and some of the parts of these islands down here, Kyushu and Shikoku. But the northern part of Honshu was still outside of imperial control, right? And Kanmu wants to bring the rest of the island under control. At that time, there were still people living up here, obviously. They just weren't living under the sort of overall power structure. And he decides that he's going to try to take over the rest of the island. Specifically, he's going to target a group of people that he called barbarians. We know them historically as the Amishi people. And to do this, he created a new title. And this title is going to be very important because it becomes basically the most important title in all of Japan. And this is Shogun. And specifically, Shogun is the military commander designated to pacifying the barbarians. That's sort of the translation of Shogun. And the first Shogun that we get in 794 is this guy named Otomo no Otomaru. And we don't have any good pictures of that guy from the time period. There's obviously stuff that's done much more recently because he becomes almost a mythical figure. But Otomo, at the time, was really just a very powerful general that was given a certain amount of unilateral control, right? Kanmu says, I want you to go up into the northern part of the island and take a big army with you, and I want you to pacify the northern part of this island. And however you need to do it, you do it. You can call up more reserves if you need to, call these samurai if you need to, and go get these guys handled. Now, what's interesting about the first time that we see Shogun is that it was not a permanent position. This was something that he was expected to basically turn back over, or it was going to expire after a certain amount of time. He was not appointed Shogun for life. When he finished his job, the title would end. Now, obviously, this is going to shift over the course of history because we end up with shoguns that rule for, decades. Why didn't they just use the cameras in their phones? I'm not sure exactly what we're talking about. I don't know why the phones would be used to fight. I'm missing the joke. I'm sorry. Now, as we move a little bit more further through time, we don't have photos of this guy. I see. Yeah. Well, we don't have paintings or drawings of this guy from the time period either. He was just a guy that was given a job and did it fairly well. So there probably were at one point drawings of him, but they may not have survived, or the ones that exist haven't been scanned and put on the internet for me to find. But moving forward through time, we get to a very formative period of Japanese history called the Heian period. And the Heian period is a really big, sort of tumultuous period of Japanese history, because by the time that we get there, this is in the this is about 150 or so years after we see this stuff happening. We've got we'll see the first appearance of the shogun. This is like 800s and early 900s. Anyway, it's like that's not correct. Anyway, after we have this big rush of power base here, and we've got bureaucrats in the political structure fighting aristocrats in the social structure, and they're both trying to win. The bureaucrats, of course, are trying to get the emperors to expand tax codes that are going to extend over these aristocratic people to make them pay more taxes and lower the power of the aristocrats. And of course, the aristocrats are trying to find loopholes to amass individual wealth so that they can put together military power through collection of samurai and not have to listen to the emperor. And this is eventually going to be really bad for, if you can guess, the poorest of the people in Japan. And the farmers and the peasants in Japan are during the Heian period are going to basically be at the behest of either bureaucrats or aristocrats, and they're getting pretty much run over either way. And what ends up happening is that some of these groups of smaller farmers and middle-sized farmers will start making little sort of protection rings for themselves. They will band together and say, we will act in unison, and by pooling resources or by building little alliances, they're actually able to develop their own little middle class. And at this point, it's sort of a third power base option, because a lot of the samurai who were in this, again, kind of middle status were recognizing that they were not benefiting from either the imperial bureaucratic structure or the aristocratic nobility structure. They were just sort of stuck in the middle, and that, of course, leaves them, very unsatisfied with their situation. So they're going to sort of bond together on their own. And when the emperor or these nobles want soldiers, they call up their samurai, and the samurai go, no, we're not fighting for you. And this is a really sort of kind of awakening moment where people go, oh, wait, we've got to have these people on our side, because if we don't have them on our side, how are we going to enforce our will, right? If you don't have the swords and bows and, horses and men in armor to go do the fighting, that means you can just, go do it yourself, but nobody in the nobility wants to do that, and certainly the imperial bureaucratic structure doesn't want to go fight, so you need these people. But what this is going to do is shift pretty dramatically. And when the military power itself becomes somewhat independent, it's going to change both the structure of the aristocratic families and the power base of the imperial clan, but it's also going to change the samurai themselves, because when they get a little bit of power, then they kind of have to decide how they're going to use it. And what ends up happening is a lot of these samurai families end up becoming sort of the new nobility. And they take on the role of the former aristocratic structures. If I'm going to fight for you and everything that you say is going to be based on my ability to deliver, why don't I just fight for myself, and then you can't stop me because I was your army, right? So you just can't do anything about it at that point. So we get big, powerful clans like the Fujiwara, the Minamoto, and the Taira. These are sort of the big three early samurai clans, and they're all going to fight over this position of shogun. They all want to be the one that's in charge, because if you're in charge, you have all the power. And the one that is going to come out on top is this guy. And if you've been on stream before, you've probably heard me talk about this dude if we're talking about Japan, because he's one of the most important Japanese figures in history. This guy's name is Minamoto Yoritomo, and in 1192, this guy's going to receive the title of shogun, but he's going to take that one step further. And he gets the title of shogun from the emperor, but then he's going to go out and basically make himself a new government. And this is the first time we see somebody from this sort of samurai class effectively trying to run the entire country. And we come up with a new term for this, which is bakufu. And bakufu is translated to tent government. So basically, like a military tent where we're out on the battlefield and we're making our command structures and doing all this stuff from the tents, we're going to run the country from a tent as well. And it's during this period that the samurai are going to basically take over the country from the aristocracy. The samurai at this point are more powerful than the old aristocratic families, and over time, the shogun under the Minamoto clan is going to slowly but surely start taking more power. If you get a little bit of power, you can use that to turn it into more power, right? What's up, Lopta? And hey, Ali, good to see you. Welcome in. So, what do we want to do? We can't necessarily just go straight for the head and kill the emperor and say that the shogun is the new emperor. There's actually way too much religious ideology and political ideology wrapped up in the concept of having an emperor, so you can't just kill the guy. But you can try to start taking away some of his powers, and you got to start kind of small if you're new at this, like, Minamoto was. So you go start with small stuff, and you start making appointments through military ranks, but instead of military positions, these people are getting political power through the military. So effectively, we have militarized the political structure, and where a position used to be a command structure within the military, we're now going to basically give this new types of political power, like the title Shugo. This is a military title, but it becomes synonymous with provincial governors. Right, exactly. We end up turning the emperor into a puppet, which is not too terribly long from the period of time that we're talking about. But we're going to take over the provisional governors. Now, the emperor was supposed to be able to appoint territorial governors from clans and clan heads that he thought were going to be loyal to him. But here we have this new Bakufu structure where we are running everything through the military, where Minamoto is appointing military governors over these different provinces. And whereas there used to be old aristocratic or imperial positions that would do things like collect taxes, now there's going to be this new military position called Jito, and they're going to be overseeing taxing and farming in the provinces. So we have sort of flip-flopped the administration here, where we're getting rid of the old lower level positions in administration, and we're making sure that we are putting new military people in those positions. And how do you keep your Bakufu funded? Well, you make sure that you control the tax revenues. So you've got to have a tax person. How do you keep all of the provinces in line? You make sure that you have governors, so you got to have a provincial governor. This is a pretty brilliant strategy here. We've got a command structure in the military already. We're used to taking orders because we have ranks in the military. We just switch this out for political stuff. We kind of roll on down the road like nobody really knew any different. But what this does over time is draws a lot of attention to the position of shogun itself, because now we have an emperor, and as Bloodbender pointed out, this guy was supposed to be the head of the government, but in reality he's not really any powerful position anymore. He's just sort of a figurehead. Though the real power sits with the shogun, but what can we do to control the shogun? And this brings up new titles. And what we start seeing is the same thing that would have happened on the imperial branch happening in the military, where we now have the creation of new titles like Shiken, who is going to be a regent for the shogun. So we start killing shoguns, because we can kill shoguns all day long, right? Because they're in the military. They're sort of signed up to die. We can assassinate them. We can poison them. We can't kill the emperor. Dude, shogun's free reign though, right? So if I kill you and put your kid on the throne, and then I stand behind you, now, like, I'm controlling a shogun that's a puppet, who's controlling the emperor that's a puppet, but I'm the puppet master in the background. And this is what Shiken is this position of regent to the shogun. And this is going to transition through a period of time where there's a lot of turmoil, because people are going to be trying to control the position of shogun. And you have Hojo clan showing up trying to fight Minamoto clan. The Hojo clan is going to end up dominating stuff, but this turns into a whole big thing of more fighting. And over the course of the period of time from the 1100s to the early 1300s, we're basically just going to see a very heavy militarization of Japanese culture, because, again, the military is running the show. Right? Note to self, don't be emperor, shogun, or anything, really. Lopta, that's fairly safe, right? If you want to be anything, you be a samurai in a very, very border type of area that has enough food production to feed everybody in your province, or you wouldn't be running a province if you were a samurai, everybody in your domain, and you basically just try to stay out of it, right? You just keep your head down, administer your people as best as possible and as fairly as possible, and hope that in the big wars that are happening down south, everybody forgets that you're up there. That's pretty much the safe way to go about this. But with the emperor is running the shogun. Yeah, there we go. I see what you did there. I appreciate that. With this militarization, we see the standardization of things, right? We start seeing the stereotypical swords and armor and weaponry of the shogun. We start seeing the development of all of these ideas that we'll talk about later, and I'll show you a lot of pictures of this stuff later as well. But this transition from the late 1100s to the early 1300s is really where we see the concept of samurai really solidify, because we have these people, they're in military positions, but these military positions now have power, they have money. Because they have money, they're able to buy nice things. Because they can get nice things, they're going to want to be in fashion. But then you have to have a fashion to be in fashion. So you start seeing standardized things. You start seeing styles happen. You start seeing trends happen. And this is stuff like trends with armor. And we can also see this with stuff like the length of the katana blade. There are different periods of time where the lengths of the katana blades will be longer or shorter by a few inches, depending on sort of the fashion, if you can even believe that. Like, and it's not always that the longer katana is the better katana. By the time we get to the sort of end phase of samurai world under Tokugawa, the katana had actually shrunk about 4.5, 5 inches overall. Your son drew a katana yesterday, apparently. Interesting. Very cool. Encourage your kids to do art and not to stop. It's good stuff, right? It's like dudes with big loud cards. Yeah, sure, you got to show off. You have to be able to meet the expectations from society. What's up, Cave Geek? Good to see you. Now, over time, things are going to change. And when we get to these 1300s, there's going to be a pretty big shift here. Mostly because of this guy. And this guy is Ashikaga Takauji. And he is shogun from 1305 to 1358. And this is going to be an interesting period of time, because there's a big fight between who's going to be shogun. There's a whole Kamakura shogunate that we didn't talk about, because we're not necessarily talking about shogun, we're talking about samurai. And these things are going to be important here, because what happens with Ashikaga Takauji here is that he's going to basically be responsible for attempting to get rid of his opponents by restoring the emperor. There's a particular emperor named Go-Daigo who tries basically to kick out the Bakufu and reestablish imperial rule. And initially, this guy sides with the emperor, but he does it only long enough to get rid of his political enemies. And as soon as all of his enemies are defeated, Ashikaga Takauji declares himself shogun by basically blackmailing the emperor with threat of lots of bad things. But this is when we start getting a big shift here, and we're going to start using different titles that might be a little bit more familiar to everybody. The old military title of Shugo is going to get replaced by a new title called Daimyo. And Daimyo is going to be a sort of a super powerful position within the territories. And a daimyo is going to be a person that's in the samurai class, but because the samurai class had grown there are now sort of subclasses even within the samurai class. So daimyo is going to be basically noble samurai, and uh, the regular sort of everyday run of the mill samurai are going to be a little bit lower down the list. Now, what's going to happen here is when we create these daimyo and we give them these big territories, now we're sort of setting ourselves up for big, powerful, noble samurai to duke it out with each other. Kicking out the military would be an interesting challenge. Yeah, well, I mean, Go-Daigo succeeded. I believe his restoration was for like 7 years or something like that. It didn't last forever, or maybe 3 years. I can't now remember exactly how many years it was. It was not particularly long, and he was not able to retain power for the duration of anyway the rest of his life. But when we have this reorganization and we're now giving even more power to these warriors, this is turning things into problematic situations, because now we have individual noble samurai that are super powerful, that have basically their own armies that they can call up. And because we have established that the military is in charge of everything, we have really kind of injected a lot of vitriol into the mix, because everybody's got a beef with everybody else, and everybody wants to be the one in charge. And if I've got an army and you've got an army, why don't we just fight each other, right? And what ends up coming out of this is one of the most formative periods of Japanese history, called the Sengoku period. This overlaps a little bit with another period of time that we call the Muromachi period. But basically, for about the next 200 years, there is going to be a massive civil war in Japan. And it's going to be daimyo versus daimyo. It's going to be samurai versus samurai. And in the midst of all of this, nobody's really paying attention to the shogun. He's still there, and he's still nominally in charge, but he can't really do anything. The Ashikaga shogunate falls basically into another puppet position. And the real power are with these decentralized daimyo. And there are dozens of these, by the way. How are the peasants coping while all this fighting is going on? They're not doing well. The population of Japan drops precipitously, because when we go into 200 years of civil war, we're talking about perpetually taking people away from fields. So our crops are going to suffer from that. We're not going to have enough food. And also, people are just dying. And this is going to sound very blunt and very horrible, but one of the only reasons the entire island chain of Japan doesn't starve is because so many people are dying that even though they're producing less food, they're having to feed less people. It's not a good position to be in. The city of Tokyo gets burned like 7 times during this period. The countryside just gets ravaged. There are several strategic positions along the archipelago where you need to hold, because there are things like passes through the mountains, or they are really important ports, or they have very significant crossroads for transportation. And some of these areas basically just turn into big fields of mud, because they are fought over so much that all of the trees get cut down for firewood, or for wagons or arrows. All of the fields that would have been in that area, that you just don't plant them, because there's going to be another battle here in 6 months, so there's no real point in trying to grow crops that are going to grow for 8 months. It's a really messy period, figuratively and literally. And in the middle of all of this stuff, the samurai are going to be the functional power base. You've got to have them. right? At this point, if you do not have samurai on your side, you are going to lose. There's not really politics. I mean, there's the attempt at politics and there's politicking, but the political structure is who's got the biggest army. And the real sort of goal here isn't I want to reestablish politics, it's I want to kill all of my enemies. And in the middle of this, we see lots of people that are going to be very, very famous show up, like this guy. This guy's name is Oda Nobunaga. You may have heard of him. He's one of the more famous of the warlords during this period. He makes things a little bit worse because one of the things that he does during the Sengoku period is trades with the Portuguese to get guns. Because, you know, that's what we need at the end of a 200-year civil war. We need to introduce guns to the mix. Guns are, of course, going to be game changers. They're also very strictly controlled, incredibly hard to get to, and you basically have to go through Nobunaga if you want one of these. Pardon me for just a second. Thanks. Yeah, with the sinus stuff, I needed to deal with that without being on the mic. Anyway, this is Oda Nobunaga. You like the outfit? Yeah, this is a fairly common kimono style with the big shoulder pads that denotes that I'm a big, strong, powerful man. They're going to be very flowy, very loose, because it can get very hot in Japan, especially if you're out marching around on the battlefield. I mean, you can get a lot of heat. They have very humid summers, especially on the side of the island where precipitation is much more common over on the west side of the island. So the Sengoku period or Muromachi period is going to be really big. The samurai are going to be instrumental. They're going to be the ones that are making all of the sort of the big driving changes and stuff. But by the time we get to the late 1500s, early 1600s, it's going to be very clear that something needs to happen, right? Something needs to get fixed. We've got to eliminate this fighting, or because they're literally running out of food. They're running out of manpower. They're running out of pretty much everything. And the dude that's going to do that is this guy, very, very famous. This is Tokugawa Ieyasu. And he is going to establish the Tokugawa shogunate. And his reign, which starts in 1615 officially, but actually started further back in 1602, is going to continue for the next 250 years. The Tokugawa shogunate rules in Japan from 1615 until 1868. Now, over this period of time, after 1632, there are not significant military threats to the Tokugawa leadership. So what is the samurai to do if there's no more fighting, right? Well, if there's no more fighting, what you do is you basically turn into a bureaucrat. And the samurai class became much more formalized and ritualized. Their style became less about being effective battle gear and more about being pretty. Their average daily dress was less about being effective and being able to move easily if you're going to fight, and more about style and fashion. And when you aren't going to go out and fight, you basically have to figure out a reason to carry around all of this stuff. So you duel a lot. And that became very, very popular. If I can't fight you on a battlefield to solve my differences, what should I do? I should challenge you to a duel. And these became highly formalized and ritualized. And this is when we're going to really start developing, or not developing, but really start formalizing the concepts of Bushido. Um, Thanks, Lopta. And tell your son thanks for letting you borrow his computer. I believe in him too. But you're going to start seeing a lot of writing come out of this. You're going to see a lot of former samurai turn into poets. There's going to be a lot of focus on things like beautiful calligraphy. Your skill set's going to have to shift a little bit if you're not fighting on the battlefield. But by the time we get to the 1860s and we get to this period of time that starts in 1868 called the Meiji Restoration, when the emperor actually does take back over, at that point, samurai are actually outlawed. And there is a whole stream that we've done in the past about the Meiji Restoration, where basically the emperor takes back over and all of the old ways that were established under the Tokugawa are kind of made anathema. Like, you can't wear your swords in public anymore, and this was a very big sign of the samurai position. You couldn't wear top knots anymore. You weren't supposed to wear your armor anymore in public. Ritual suicide becomes forbidden, even though people still do it all the time. It was a very big shift in cultural change, and that was, of course, spearheaded by foreign powers, like especially the United States. What's up, Moose? Good to see you. So, what then is a samurai? That's the history of the samurai, but what is a samurai? Let us talk a little bit about the code of the samurai, which is called Bushido. And Bushido is a code of conduct, and the origin of this comes out of that very important formative Heian period, where the earliest samurai already had some level of special expectation. Because of their social status, again, this early period, they were above the fold, but they weren't like at the top. But they had certain privileges that were awarded to them because of their status. And one of them is called Kirisute Gomen. And Kirisute Gomen is the right to strike. And we're not talking about going on strike here. What we're talking about is the right to use my weapon against a peasant. So if you offended a samurai, or if you did something that a samurai didn't like and you were a peasant, the samurai could literally use his katana against you however he wanted. And if he wanted to chop your head off right there, he could do that. Now, in some situations, he was then expected to pay a little bit of an indemnity to whomever your local lord was, but not really expected to take care of your family or anything like that. So you didn't want to tick off the samurai. And everybody knew that they could literally just slice you up if they wanted to. And this definitely sets them apart. This is why they wore their swords in public, because they wanted to remind you that they could do this, that their position afforded them this ability, and that they were better than you. Samurai, we're better than you, and we know it, right? I don't know if anybody's ever seen Dodgeball. One of my favorite horrible go-to goofy movies, right? It's not a good movie. It's a pretty bad movie, but I love it deeply. So, right. There is another sort of expectation here. This is called Kyuba no Michi. And Kyuba no Michi is the way of the bow and arrow on horseback. And you're like, who gives a crap about shooting a bow and arrow on horseback? Well, it wasn't just that. We talk a lot about how samurai loved their swords, right? The samurai's katana is the soul of the samurai. This is a phrase that comes out of one of these Bushido books. But it wasn't the only weapon that they had, and they were actually really, really focused quite frequently on the use of the bow. And this was seen as a very important martial art for you to be able to shoot a bow. But specifically here, what's important is this is shooting a bow from horseback. A peasant could shoot a bow, but a peasant couldn't afford to keep the horse, right? Because if you are going to ride a horse into battle, you've got to take care of that horse, you got to train that horse. So being able to ride and shoot, now this has increased the skill level and the social aptitude, and you're going to need to be one of those samurai to be able to do this. So there was a sort of social grace that went along with being able to ride horses and shoot bows very well. And the importance of this is going to carry out into kind of a lifestyle thing where when you're learning to shoot bows from horseback, you have to practice certain steps. You have to go through certain breathing patterns. You have to have a certain mindset. You have to read the terrain ahead of you. And these lessons that you learned as you were riding and shooting are lessons that begin to be applied to other stuff in life, right? Where if you're in a sticky situation, you need to read the terrain, right? And you need to hold just the right amount of tension before you let go. And you need to focus on your target where it's going to be, not where it is now, right? So this kind of stuff becomes emblematic of a larger culture because our sort of mantras and our go-to phrases are going to come out of Cuba no Michi. So it's not just riding around on horses and shooting stuff. We can do that in Zelda, right? But there's a reason why that stuff shows up in Zelda. Because Link is kind of just this really cool samurai guy. He just happens to be an elf dude riding around in the woods, right? Sometimes showing is the deterrent. Exactly, Silver. Exactly. And Samurai wanted to make sure that everybody knew who they were. So I'm going to show this off. Now, during the period of time of the Samurai developing, there are going to be a lot of different religious ideologies that are going to become popular in Japan. And of course, we have the native religion of Shinto, but we also get added to that both Buddhism and Confucianism. And there are going to be elements of Bushido that call back to all three of these different ideas. Honoring your family and your family name. This is a core concept of Japanese traditional religion, Shinto. Honoring your command structure and doing your job the right way. This is a central tenet of Confucianism. Balancing your emotions and keeping yourself in mental control. This is a central concept of Buddhism. But all of these ideas are going to show up in Bushido, which is the way of the warrior, right? Got some new people coming in. Claire, good to see you. And Robin, hey, how's it going? So you see this stuff starting to bleed over as the culture adopts these new religious ideologies. Of course, the Buddhism influence and the Confucianism influence are both coming over from China. And they had been around prior to the rise of the samurai class. They're going to come over in the 500s and 600s. But they're around, and as Bushido develops, they're going to take little bits of things that fit into the warrior code and use it as they see fit. But you're going to start seeing a lot of central tenets pop up here, and one of the biggest ones and foremost is the concept of honor. Honor is the sort of the axis that Bushido spins on. You have to have honor. If you are dishonorable and I call you dishonorable, this is the most insulting thing that I can say to you, right? Did the Japanese get an emperor to mirror the Chinese tradition? So the Japanese do have an emperor, and the early Japanese emperors are really more like kings because they don't really control too much outside this. So this would be going all the way back to like the 300s AD when you see the beginning of the Yamato court. And they're going to be very beholden to the Chinese, culturally speaking. Kyle Wright comes in with the Spartacus drop in the middle of the Japanese discussion. Kyle, thank you so much for being Spartacus for 55 months. Always crazy and impressive. Thank you so much, man. I hope that you're doing well. I hope that you got back home safe and you were able to take a rest. I know you've been traveling for a while, so I hope you're doing okay, man. Get back to the question, though. The early Japanese emperors are going to owe a lot to the Chinese structure. And especially by the time we get to the 600s, there's going to be an active attempt at copy pasting the Chinese structure of imperial control into Japan during a period of time called the Taika reforms. There's a guy named Prince Shotoku that oversees a lot of this really heavy reformation of Japanese social structure that basically makes Japan a copy of China. And there's going to be a very, very heavy influence of Confucianism at that time, because Confucianism is philosophy or religion, depending on how you want to look at it, that really focuses on obeying the power structure. You are supposed to recognize your place. You're supposed to be a good man. You are supposed to follow the rules. You're supposed to make the heaven that you want to see on earth. And to do that, and the only way to do that, is to know your role and follow your role. But this reinforces the idea of a hierarchy and social structure, and the emperor is seen as the holder of the mandate of heaven. The word for heaven is here Tian, or you might see it as Dian. The T and the D are effectively pronounced basically the same way in Chinese. A little bit different than we say T or D. It's kind of halfway in between. But the idea here is that heaven, here being the universal source of power and justice and rightness, has given this individual a mandate to lead. And because of that, you cannot go against them. And when the Japanese government attempts to put this in place under the Taika reforms, there's a lot of resistance early on, but it becomes very standard. And for about the next 400 years-ish, the Japanese emperors are going to rule with basically unchallenged authority because of the influence of stuff from China, the structures that they use, and the influence on stuff like Confucianism. It's not really until you get up into there's a period of time called the Nara period, if you're interested about this. The Nara period is a very short period of time, but it's very influential, and it's basically when Japan realizes that they don't have to be a carbon copy of China, and they can effectively set up their own Japanese flavor of stuff. So if you want to look that up, it's NARA, Nara period. Why did the Koreans influence the Japanese much less? Is it because the difference in prosperity between the Chinese and the Koreans? So the Koreans actually influenced the Japanese a lot. It's just at different time periods. The first migration of people into the Japanese archipelago come out of China, but this is way far back. This is 30-ish thousand years ago. So 30,000 BC or so. And we see Stone Age remnants of people there. The big migration that brought a lot of the cultural advancement to Japan came out of Korea. Specifically, the one that brought stuff like metallurgy. The first people that ever forged a steel blade in Japan learned that from a person that came from Korea. Now, that was much more recent in time. Back during the this is around the time, the period of time is called Jomon period, but at the very end of the Jomon period is when you start seeing this big cultural advancement, where you start seeing them bring in wet rice agriculture, crop rotation, metallurgy, all that stuff comes out of Korea. And the Japanese people have a fairly long history with dealing with Korea. The biggest issue that I could point out is that Korea itself was not necessarily super focused on Japan. The bigger interest that they had were land-based trade routes that ran back through Asia to Central Asia, like basically the Silk Road stuff. And while Japan represented an interesting amount of trade partners, the Japanese were always a little bit culturally behind both the Chinese and the Koreans. So sending stuff to there as a lecture item was really cool, but you weren't necessarily getting very much out of them. And there are various periods of time when the Koreans attempted to invade Japan, or the Chinese tried to invade Japan, or the Mongols tried to invade Japan. And I'm not trying to be insulting here to the Japanese people. Obviously, they have an amazing and storied history that I love dearly. But there's no fault in saying that, they were at a lower level of civilization than the Chinese and Koreans for quite some time. China is one of the oldest civilizations in history, so a lot of people are going to be behind them technologically and on the scale of civilization, right? So, but yeah, I mean, the Koreans are going to have an influence on Japan, especially during several periods of time where Japanese people, especially the shoguns or the emperors of Japan, start bringing in a lot of Buddhist influence. When Confucianism dies a little bit in the face of the shogunate, if you're the shogun, you want to influence Buddhism and you want to de-emphasize Confucianism because you're not really paying attention to the power structure. You want to keep enough focus on Confucianism to recognize that you're the puppet, right? You're the puppet master of the emperor, but you don't want everybody to just think that the emperor should be in charge, because then why are you calling the shots? All right, Claire, good to see you. Thanks for popping by. So you bring in a lot of Buddhist influence, and there are periods of time where Buddhism is actually very, very popular in Japan, and they're bringing in people that are highly trained in Buddhism, and some of the really important teachers that become popular in Japan that are teaching versions of Buddhism come from Korea, specifically some Korean monks that come over, and specifically when people from Japan send their Buddhist leaders to China and Korea to learn, and then those people come back to Japan with copied sutras that they've copied from libraries in Korea and China. So there's a constant move of ideas, but by the time Japan gets to, especially the 1600s, they just sort of shut off. They are very highly isolationist. They are not particularly interested in anybody. And then we could talk about all the horrible stuff that happens between China and Japan and Korea in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And that's really nasty too. Lots of violence. Okay, so getting back to Bushido, and that was a fairly long tangent, but I think that was a good tangent, and I think it added context to the discussion, so I don't particularly mind that tangent. Honor, at the top, most important, gotta have it. Loyalty is next. You are expected to do what you're told. You're expected to be loyal. You're expected to follow orders. You're not expected to question. You are supposed to act without thought. And one of the things of Bushido here that is sort of tied into this. So honor and loyalty. The next one is service. You are a servant, and that is the point of Bushido. You are not supposed to get outside of your lane. And what's really interesting here, if you read some of these samurai manuals, including one called the Hagakure. Hagakure is written by this guy named Yamamoto Tsunetomo. And in this book, that's a samurai manual, basically, he says you are supposed to live like you are already dead. And what that means is you are already dead, because whatever your Lord tells you to do, he holds your life. You don't hold your life. You're dead, right? What you need to do is control the dying. So you're already dead. You are alive, but you are dead. What you can do is die the right way. And that means if your Lord says, go take that hill because we need it in our battle, you go take that hill. And if your Lord says, go charge that position and you know that you're going to die, it doesn't matter, you go do it. Because you're already dead. The only thing you can control is how you die. And you have to die the right way. You have to die with honor. You have to die with loyalty. and you had to die making sure that you are going to represent your family name as best as possible. So die as a Klingon, kind of, sorta. I mean, that's a kind of a ha-ha, but the Klingons are all about some bat-leg duels and stuff like that. But the idea of a culture built around battle is sort of very Bushido here. Even going so far as, if we look at especially the stuff that we learn in the Next Generation, where Worf sort of describes the different levels of Klingon military stance, where at the beginning of the battle you do your sort of stance to let your opponent know where you stand on the ability level. So like if you have, we can make this like karate. So like if you are a blue belt, you make your little blue belt stance, and the other person's going to make the black belt stance, and you go, this person's going to kill me, so I quit. This kind of stuff is very, very similar to Bushido. People would have reputations, and they would know, like, that dude is killer, and he's got particular stances, and this is the way he's going to beat you, and you'd have to psych your opponent out, and you'd play the duel out in your head. If we look at another one of the big books that's written that just sort of describes samurai lifestyle, this is the Gorin Sho, or the Book of Five Rings. This is written by a very, very famous samurai named Minamoto Musashi. The whole book is about fighting stances and how these different fighting stances line up with mental alignments. Like, if you think like this might be the stance for you. And if you want to fight with these particular weapons, this is the better stance. And if you're in this particular situation, you want to fight with this stance. Sumo wrestling comes to mind. There's an overlap there with sumo as well, right? Sure. Any sort of competition where it's not just skill versus skill, it's mental skill plus physical skill versus mental skill plus physical skill, right? That whole idea that it's all in your mind is part of this. So, sure. But honor, loyalty, and service. And one of the big things that comes out of this, as I know it, some clans were well known. Oh, yeah, for sure. Examples. Like the Tokugawa are obviously an example here, but the Hojo clan, they were very well known. I'm losing all of my words here. The Mori clan. They're from down in the southern part of Honshu. They were very, very well known and understood to be great swordsmen. You didn't want to pick a fight with those guys. Yes, you do not want to mess with the Wu-Tang clan, though they are Chinese, not Japanese. So you don't want to mess with them, and if you do mess with them, you've got to protect your neck, right? Because that's where they go for, right? Yeah, it's like an OG how-to vid if you read the Book of Five Rings. And by the way, both of those books, the Hagakure by Yamamoto Tsunetomo and the Gorin Sho by Minamoto Musashi, they're both very, very easy to find online. If you catch me on Discord or something, let me know. I've got PDF copies of both of them, and I can send you a copy. I might actually just post those in Discord if people are interested. Just somebody remind me, and I'll post those later on. Okay, so we've got a soldier here. We know the history of the soldier. We know the mindset of the soldier. But what are we doing? What's our kit look like, right? How do we get ready for battle? And this is one of the parts of the stream where I think we're going to do a much better job this time around because we have much better pictures. So let's walk through a little bit what a samurai is going to wear and how this works. And we'll look a little bit about how things change a little bit over time. And I'll show you some pictures of sort of kind of a piece by piece here. So if we look at what a samurai is wearing and what they're carrying into battle, we're going to start with these two items. So this jacket here is called a hitatare, And these pants here are called hakama. And your hitatare is going to be usually woven out of something fairly soft, but also something with a little bit of padding. So this here, this particular one is made out of silk, but it's got a little bit of padding. Well, I mean, it's going to be heavy, sure, because one of the things that this is going to do is protect your body from all of the stuff that you're about to put on it, right? So when we start throwing all of these other pieces of armor on top, we want some level of comfort between our body and that stuff. But you can see some pretty important things here. We've got drawstrings at the arms to make those secure. We have several different types of fastenings that are going to make sure that everything's staying in place. Are equestrian horse owners important here? Absolutely. So the samurai and up are the only people that can really afford horses. Robin, I think we talked about that maybe right before you popped in. But yeah, the samurai are going to be big on horseback. I have pictures of horse armor, but I didn't put it in here. If somebody reminds me when we get to the end of the stream, I'll show you some samurai horse armor. But again, this is going on under, so we have hitatare and hakama. Now, if we start putting stuff together, we have some pretty cool shoes here. And the Japanese word for these is kutsu. And your kutsu are going to be designed to get some good traction, but also to keep your feet dry. Right? You don't want to walk around with squinchy feet. So a lot of them are fur-lined. And they have these kind of high ankles that are going to cinch around the bottom of your feet. Right, so you put your foot in, and this is, you sort of wrap this in and wrap this around the outside of your ankle. It's kind of like reverse tight rolling your jeans. You sort of just tight wrap your foot into your kutsu. This is, of course, going to make sure that you also have really good traction, because footwork and footing is a super duper important part of the overall samurai thing, right? You're going to want to make sure that you can move freely without slipping. That comes down to your kutsu. All right. If we move up the leg, we have here sunniate. Sunniate are shin guards. And you can notice how these come down and they taper a little bit. This is actually designed to get down into the top of the kutsu a little bit so that you can wrap these around the top of the kutsu and kind of have a little bit of overlap. You're also going to see that they come up over to the top of the knee cap, but the slant here is designed so that you can still move your knee backwards, to kind of make like a 90-degree angle with it. And so that when you sit on horseback, your kneecap is still covered while your leg is still able to bend. So there is logic behind all of these. And you can also see here that we have hinged joints on some of these. This is designed to move with you. So we know that if you plant your foot and tilt one way or the other, your calf muscle is going to change shape. And as a way to make sure that your armor moved with you, you see your good old-fashioned hinges here. These, of course, would be forged iron. Your wood here is going to be very, very heavily lacquered so that it is particularly hard and rather durable, and in many cases waterproof. And this is all going to be held together by very, very thick leather with really, really thick stitching to make sure that it doesn't rip while you're wearing it. Especially down here around the ankle, you don't want stuff messing up again your footwork. Are they native to Japan or were they introduced? Horses were not native to Japan. They were brought in during migrations. There are not very many large mammals that are native to Japan. They have some bears, but mostly up in the north. They have rabbits, they have deer, but even cows are brought in. they're not native to Japan. So a lot of the big, especially large domesticated animals are going to come over from either China or Korea. But this is also one of the biggest reasons why you see only the rich people being able to afford them, because it's hard to both find these things and then keep them up. So, if we move up a little bit, dragons are mythologically native to Japan, but not actually native to Japan. Now, they probably had dinosaur bones there occasionally, but a lot of the soil in Japan... I don't actually know how many dinosaurs have come from Japan. That's an interesting question. I don't know the history of paleontology in Japan. Fascinating question there. Okay, so we see here our sleeves, and these are called kote. And here comes Aristotle. Hey, Aristotle and friends. Yeah, what's up, Unusual Quarters? Welcome in. Casey Snow, good to see you. Dinosaurs from Japan. I'm sure there are some somewhere. I just don't know what they are. Also, what's up, Casey? Good to see you. And Rexler is here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Hey, everybody from Aristotle's stream. Welcome in. My name is Shane. I teach stuff at college, history and anthropology and sociology. And on stream, we are talking samurai tonight. And we have talked about the history of samurai, sort of politically where they came from. We have talked about the code of Bushido, which is sort of the thought pattern of the samurai. And now we're going through the samurai armor and weapon sets. So we're looking at a whole bunch of pictures that I took last year when I got to go to an absolutely amazing traveling collection of samurai armor. This was the largest collection of samurai armor in private collection that has ever been to the United States. I was very lucky to see it. It was absolutely amazing and very much worth the price of admission. So let me say hey to everybody that just came in. Lumpy Dragon Potato, good to see you as always, my friend. I hope you're doing well. Let's see what we're saying. You need to hear the story about the okay. Floppy Jimmy, what's going on, man? Good to see you. We've got kind of Twitch royalty in the chat tonight. What's up, Floppy Jimmy? Good to see you, man. Eris recommended a diaper while watching stream, so you're pampered up and ready to learn, man. Heck yeah, Jimmy. Good to see you, man. Hope you're doing all right. Thanks again, Aristotle, for the raid. So we're talking samurai. And if you've got any questions about Japanese stuff or samurai stuff or anything like that, throw that stuff in chat. I'd be happy to answer it. We're going to head back over a little bit and check out some more pictures if that's cool. And as always, feel free to make yourself at home, hang out, do your thing. We're all pretty chill here, right? All right. So again, we're talking about samurai armor, and these particular things are called kote. What's my opinion on cows? 4chan Yanni, I'm a pretty big fan of both beef and of milk. So I am pro-cow. Very pro-cow. What did samurai make of steam engines? They were not very impressed, considering the arrival of steam engines in Japan led to the downfall of samurai society in the 1860s. Most notably, steamships that had American cannons attached to them that blew up Tokyo. Ask the Japanese whether or not they'd like this guy named Matthew Perry. Yeah, Yanni, I had myself a really, really good ribeye steak on Sunday. It was legit. And, I am not necessarily one to toot my own horn, but I'm going to tell you, I cooked the heck out of that steak. It was friggin' good. You have a samurai question. Your old ninjutsu master said there were more murders from the wooden swords than actual katana. Are there any insights? Let me switch back over to face stream here and answer this question. This is a fascinating question. So, in Japanese culture, if you're going to train with a sword, you don't start with the sword. You don't give just some random, 10-year-old kid one of the sharpest blades that's ever been made and tell the guy to wave that junk around like you just don't care. Of course not. You give them a wooden sword called a bokken, which is weighted to be about the same weight as a katana, and it's shaped to be the same length and shape as a katana, and you train that kid on that for a long time. Now, the question specifically is, did we kill people with these things? Yeah, you can kill people with a bokken. And part of this gets to how we're doing duels. And Lumpy, before you showed up in chat, we talked a little bit about how the code of the samurai is built around honor and how you've got to be able to defend your honor, so you're going to end up fighting duels quite a bit. Now, one of the things that you could do if you were offended but not interested in potentially getting your head chopped off by this guy is that you could choose to fight a duel with bokken. Now, this is obviously going to lessen the chance of you getting straight murked, right? But these are sort of like, they're clubs for all intents and purposes. And if I whack you across the skull with one of these wooden swords, I could crack your skull open with it, right? If I hit you in the Adam's apple with one of these things, I can collapse your larynx and you're going to suffocate to death. So you could absolutely get killed with a bokken. And if we're going to start counting heads and say like, oh, well, there are more of these people killed this way or that way. I don't know if we've got numbers, but I can say that you can kill somebody with a bokken. And we know that it happened occasionally. I don't know if anybody's got a tally sheet where we sat down and, counted up all of the numbers. Also, I find it really interesting that you had a ninjutsu master, because ninjutsu wasn't a thing. But that's a whole other topic, right? What's up, Nick Slottle? Good to see you. Good to see you. Yes, our friend Carr would occasionally hit people with his walking stick at school. We had a mutual friend that had some mobility issues and used a cane or sometimes a proper wizard staff walking stick because we're high school kids, and would occasionally thwack people with the walking stick. All right. Moving back over to our kote. So let's look at this piece of armor and get a little bit of information about it. First off, we've got some guards on the top of our hands that are going to cover our knuckles, but they leave our hands open. You can see here that you've got yourself a nice little loop that goes over your thumb, and you've got another loop that comes in between your fingers. This is going to allow you freedom of motion, but again, it's going to keep the tops of your hands and that nice big thumb joint covered, because if I'm trying to, fight you in a duel and I can crack you across the knuckles, that's a really good way for me to get you to drop your sword. So it's nice to have padding on that stuff, right? If we move up the arm, we can see here that we have really, really nice, very, very fine mail. You can hear people call this ring mail. All mail is ring mail. Ring mail is a redundant phrase, right? It's sort of like darkness of night, right? It's nights are dark. That's just the way that it goes. But we start seeing here on the upper arm the addition of several importantly placed metal studs. And these are basically designed to try to keep the slashing power of a katana to a minimum, right? If I've got a sword, and these are like super sharp swords again, right? And if I'm going to hit you across this mail, there's a chance that if part of this mail gets snagged, I can rip some of this open. But as a way to combat that, I'm going to put these metal pieces on so that if you hit your blade across one of them perpendicular to it, it's just going to slide off instead of catching. And this makes my mail much more difficult to tear, and it's going to make it much more durable against slashing. Against a thrust, this isn't going to be, super duper more effective than other types here, but this is really good against the slash. And if you've ever played a game like, I don't know, Dark Souls or something like that, there's a reason why there's a difference between thrusting damage and slashing damage, and it's stuff just like this, right? This is really cool tech, Rexler, I agree. So let me catch up. You did ninjutsu for 5 months. He said ninja stuff was more marketing and the proper name was bujitsu. That's closer, but still questionable, Lumpy. But you're getting there. You lose your handicap momentarily after 2 to 3 hours of martial arts. The effects are not lasting. And ew, interesting. Oh yeah, Silver. The amount of effort that goes into making this stuff is just absolutely friggin' crazy, right? Just super duper levels of skill and time and patience. Just absolute amazing amounts of stuff. Yeah, armorers could command a very healthy salary, and they would have an entire group of people that would be working to make these armor pieces, not just one person. You would have an apprentice whose job it was basically to make metal rings. And the way that you make these big metal rings is you get the metal very hot and you pull it out into a really, really long string, and then you go behind and you just chop it after you spiral it up a little bit. And then you have to link all of them together and hammer them closed. And that's a ton of work. We're talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of work put into these things. Yeah, multiplied by every samurai alive. But this is also one of the reasons why armor gets passed down through families, because the skill involved is very, very high, which means that the cost is absolutely astronomical. Jess the Jerk. Dun 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 dun. Jess the Jerk, thank you so much for that follow, and welcome to the adventure. Unusual Quarters followed me 10 minutes ago, and I didn't say anything about that, so I apologize, Unusual Quarters. Thank you so much for the follow, and welcome in. I've got to figure out how all of the stuff works. The sound and playing stuff on Twitch is constantly shifting, and it bothers me. All right, so what are we looking at here? Well, we are looking at our chest armor. The Japanese word for this is do. We would say do, do. This is going to be built in several different layers. The bottommost layer is usually going to be a series of wooden planks. And on top of that, you're going to see metal pieces to hold all of this stuff in specific location. And then you're almost always going to get this really, really tight stitching, which is going to add shape and form to the armor, but it's also going to add a little bit of beauty to it. When you get down here to the legs, you're going to see the skirting, which comes over the waist, and you're going to see these sort of long pantaloon kind of things that come out of the bottom. This is going to mostly be loose, and there's going to be a little bit of a gap between the top of the knee and the bottom of the waist here, but I'll show you what goes over this in just a second. Tactical knickers, indeed. So this is fit on sort of like a clamshell. You're going to have one side that's almost always fixed, and then the other side that's open. You can see the open side over here that's tied shut. And you're going to put one arm through over here, and you're going to clamshell it together on the other side on top of your other arm, and you're going to tie it and cinch it around basically the middle of your rib cage to make sure that it is super tight. And then this is going to cover you basically from the top of the shoulder all the way down to basically mid-thigh. But this is called the do. Now, on top of that, you have these guys. And these are How much did all of this weigh? Bam Bam, are you specifically talking about uh, the like the chest piece armor itself, or are you talking about like the entire kit all together? Just the dough. It really depends on how much ornamentation is on it, and it depends on how much stitching is on it. But we're looking. Well, I mean, do you are you a pound person or are you a kilogram person? Because I can do the pound to kilogram stuff if you want me to. Um, oh, you do the American pounds. So the chest piece itself is probably going to be like 10 pounds ish if we're talking about, because again we've got the wooden panels that are the bottom and they're super lacquered, and you've got metal fixtures that are holding it all together, and you've got all the stitching that goes on top of it, and then attached to that you have your shoulder guard protections that come sort of over the top of your neck, and then the longer stuff that hangs down below it. You're probably looking at 8-10 pounds. But if you put the entire suit together, and you're talking like from the top, from the kabuto all the way down to the bottom of the shoe and the kutsu, you're looking at probably about 40-ish pounds probably for all of it together. And if you get some of like the big fancy armor that comes later on, the stuff that's like the full battle dress that's got like the mask and like the really really ornate super big head pieces that have these really really crazy mountings, and then you have like all of the like the trappings of the hatamoto in the back, the sort of like little back banner, all of that put together. If you've got the full what's called the oyoroi, so O is sort of like a designator of great. The oyoroi armor sets, these get up to like 65-70 pounds, but that's like the full Monty kind of version of the armor stuff. And then you have to go swing a sword for 3 hours, right? Or more, depending on how long the battle is, right? Yeah, it's rough. It's not fun. Even this though is still less weight than the average plate armor that a medieval knight on horseback would have to wear, because that stuff could be like 100 pounds, right? So, all right. So these pieces here are thigh panels, and they attach to the belt region and they hang down over your thighs. And the word here is kusazuri. Kusazuri. And these are mostly just wooden pieces that have been stitched together a little bit in the back. The biggest defense that these are going to offer you is against arrows. These are not the world's best armors against direct thrusts, so if you're fighting somebody with an O Naginata, they're going to be able to turn this pretty easy. You're going to get some slash protection from this, but these go on top of the do. So they would attach here and kind of hang down this way. So these thigh armor pieces, I don't think I told you, but these are called haidate. And the kusuzari are going to hang on top of that, kind of down at an angle here on the waist. And you can see it here, and it would just kind of hang down this way. How long would long battles go for? That's a great question. So, in Samurai on Samurai Battle, it didn't really work out the way that the average European battle worked, where you have two sides and they just kind of ran at each other. Samurai on Samurai battles were basically a very, very long series of duels, where I would move myself into battle and I would see an enemy samurai and I would challenge him across the battlefield, and then we would duel. And then I would go find another opponent and I would challenge him, and then we would duel. And this continued until basically one side capitulated or nobody was left. So it could take all day or multiple days, right? Yeah. Not all battles were just one-on-one fights. You would send your foot soldiers in, right? Or you could send your army in. But if you're specifically at the end of the battle and you've gained the position and your soldiers are moving in and your samurai are going to hit the battlefield, there's a lot of duels going on. Now, this might be in the middle of a whole bunch of other peasants stabbing each other with spears, but you kind of knew better than to stab somebody while they were in a duel, because that was very dishonorable, right? You didn't stab somebody in the back, you didn't shoot somebody in the back, you didn't disrupt a duel, you just like let it happen. Now, if the duel was over, you could kind of rush the samurai, sure, but he could also kill all of you. He was armored and you weren't, right? So that's kind of how you fight. You just call people names, sure, right? What portion of the population was in the armed forces back then? It feels like agricultural was taking up less. Everybody fought when it was time. Everybody could get called up for military service. And one of the reasons it doesn't feel like agriculture was taking up less than in Europe is because we don't learn a lot about Japanese society, and most people don't know that they fought a civil war that lasted for 200 years, right? That depopulated the entire country. So, yeah, there's a lot of fighting, and everybody's involved. If you get called, you show up. I mean, battles in Europe could take days as well. Oh yeah, 200 years. Yeah, the Sengoku period is from the early 1400s into the early 1600s. Yeah, it's about 200 years. It's crazy. Yeah, it's absolutely crazy. Right. And we look at the American Civil War, which lasted like 4 years, and how many people it killed. Of course, they had guns and stuff like that, but yeah, 200 years depopulates most of Japan. It's pretty crazy. They must have really not liked each other. You can catch the VOD on YouTube, and I'll walk you through it. It was pretty nasty. Give me just a second again. Sorry about this. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate that. Okay, so this is a mask. This is also going to cover your throat. The mask here is called a mempo. And menpo are designed to, serve as armor, obviously, but this is also pretty intimidating, right? Some of these masks got really, really elaborate. This guy's got a fake mustache, Some of these are going to be designed to look like demon faces, hanging around your neck to make sure you just don't get your head chopped off as much. Pretty straightforward. This is a fairly basic helmet. The Japanese word for helmet is kabuto. Funny little note here: if you ever played Pokemon, and you know the fossil Pokemon Kabutops or Kabuto, it's designed to look like a helmet because it is a helmet, right? That's the shape of the Pokemon. It's named after these things, Kabuto. Anyway. Helmet here, it's going to show your crest. This particular crest, the word for crest in Japanese is mon, M-O-N. These three leaves here are hollyhock leaves because this is the mon of the Tokugawa clan. So the person that owned this armor was in the Tokugawa clan. But this is your kit, and if we put it all together, it can be pretty elaborate, and it could look like this. And I really appreciate the way that these were all set up so that you can kind of see how everything went together. You've got your shin guards, and you've got your arms and your sleeves and your chest. This particular chest is pretty great because it is also covered with additional metal plates on the outside that are riveted in. instead of stitching. So that's a pretty neat little addition to the armor set here. This guy, of course, has Minpo that's got this really furious nose and a really big, like, super bad, crazy mustache. Much larger helmet crest here, but, you know, you get the idea that there are a lot of different types of armor and different sets of armor that you can see hanging around. If we move on to stuff that we're using to kill people with, we have stuff like this guy. Now, this is a pole arm, and we can see this really wickedly carved blade here on top of this really, really big pole. This is what's called a naginata. And naginata were a pretty common weapon. Spears were poor people weapons. Naginata were rich people weapons. And most notably because this forged blade up here would be forged in the same sort of technique that you would use to make a katana. So this is going to be much more expensive than just your average spear, which is basically just going to have a little pointy thing on it like this, and you're going to use it to stab people, right? Sometimes those were broken down and made into swords. They could be, because the metal here is the same type of quality that you would use to make yourself a sword. And it's very handy for getting down apples. That's where you've heard that before. Are you talking about the Pokemon there, Nixlotl? Yeah. You also have these. These are bows. Bows are called Yumi. This is a very, very, very elaborate bow and quiver set. This, again, is a Tokugawa. And you can see here the 3 Tokugawa hollyhock leaves. But you got 2 bows here. Very, very fine, elegant bows with a quiver of arrows that would be mountable. The way that you would mount this is to your waist and usually really far down here. Really far down here. And that would allow you to sort of, if like, pull your bow out like this, and it would be kind of canted, so you could kind of and shoot this way. The bows themselves are not shaped exactly the same way that we would make a bow in, like, I don't know, like kid stuff or what we might call Western bows. The top, where your hand grip is, the top part of the bow is typically longer than the bottom part of the bow. So a lot of that has to do with the fact that you're using it on horseback. So you need to be able to move your bow from side to side on top of the horse, and if your bow comes really, really far out of the bottom, you getting that over the horse as you're moving around is going to be much more difficult. Yeah. The quiver here is just absolutely beautiful. There's a lot of craftsmanship that went into this. This would have been much, much later, after the Tokugawa had started to become much more bureaucratic, and focus starts being paid to lots of attention to fancy detail and inlay and stuff like this, because, again, we've moved into a bureaucratic position where you're just trying to show off. Would all samurai be trained as archers? Yes. And as horsemen? Yes, Rexler. Yes to both. Were they made out of yew? I don't think so. Most of these are going to be, I don't know, maybe. Now that I say that. I know that they're made out of wood, and they're not composite bows, so they're not made out of bone or anything like that. But here you can see a much better example of how these bows would have been arranged. You know, your handhold is down here, and you got this really, really top long part that sticks out. And the bottom part is substantially smaller, and you can see where it would have been attached to the armor here, and here's your quiver standing by for you to apply rapid fire if you need. Here, of course, we have a good old-fashioned katana. I think everybody probably knows what a katana is. This is the long blade that signified samurai rank. And then we have a couple of smaller blades here displayed. This is wakizashi. This is a medium-sized blade. Probably would have been much more common for people that were not samurai rank to carry one of these around. You could only carry 2 if you were in the samurai rank. So you could carry 1 if you were kind of like a bodyguard or something like that, but you could only carry the pair if you were high up. And then we have a smaller dagger. These would have usually been tucked sort of in the belt or kept at the lower back, and this would be good for lots of cutting and stabbing stuff. And you, if you ever got down to just using those, stuff had gone pretty crazy. You might keep one of these under your pillow, though, just in case the bad guy showed up at night. If you're going to do ritual suicide, this is the blade that you're almost certainly going to use, your wakizashi. They're going to dismantle the blade. The tang of the blade that one runs down here into the handle can be removed. You'd pop this pin out, and you'd take that handle part out, and you'd wrap the middle part with paper, and then you use that to slice your guts open if you're going to commit seppuku, which I'm sure, everybody's super excited about seppuku. I know way too much about seppuku, if there is such a thing. But yeah, so this is samurai stuff, and it's really cool. It's got a lot of really well thought out armor stuff and weaponry. It's also just got really cool history and ideology. So that is the history of the samurai. And I hope that the discussion has left you feeling samurai'd, which of course is a reference to the very great Boston song, Feeling Satisfied. Bit of a pun there at the end, but you know I had to throw at least one of them in the discussion, right? Or slicing apples. Yep. Did you miss the part about the last samurai? No, because it's fake and made up. Did they have any instruments for psychological damage, like how Aztecs used death whistles? Not really. One of the things that they would use for scary stuff is like smoke. If you wanted to weave some like smoky stuff into your armor and run into battle smoking, that's pretty scary. You might occasionally have the traditional exchanging of insults, and I know that there's a joke in what is it, Ninja Turtles 2, right, where they have the pre-fight donut, right? But this is more like a pre-fight screaming match where I declare myself and all of my accomplishments and all of my titles and demand you, yeah, like your mother was a hamster and all that stuff. And then your leader comes out and does the same kind of thing, and we try to kind of psych each other out. And we might occasionally use some drums that we would use to keep pace while we're marching, but we might bang on some drums really loud. But not anything like not anything like bagpipers, which are obviously scary as heck because nobody wants to be on the battlefield where there's a bagpiper, right? On a more serious or related note, was the Samurai class banned? It was banned. The Samurai class itself was banned under the Meiji Restoration, and they did so by doing stuff like banning swords and banning top knots and banning traditional dress. So yeah, you were supposed to give up the old ways and adapt to the new ways. That explains anime a lot. Yeah, where the Ginyu Force shows up and they taunt Goku, and they don't, not taunting Goku, I guess they're taunting Krillin and Gohan and Vegeta, and they do all of their poses. Yeah, that's kind of like pre-battle stuff, right? If you chase somebody with a katana and you know how to use it, that's probably sufficient psychological incentive. Yeah, I mean, they're scary stuff, right? They're scary stuff. All right. Anybody else have any questions about anything? I have expended rather all of the material that I was going to cover. But if anybody has any other questions, I'd be happy to answer questions if we got any. Otherwise, we might try to find somebody to stream, or just to raid rather. I'm streaming. Somebody to raid. You have a non-topic related one. Okay. Non-topic related. Who are the first couple famous samurais to come to mind? Miyamoto Musashi is probably the most famous samurai ever. Right? Probably the most famous samurai ever. If I had to guess. He's so much that he is like moved into like the realms of video gaming, right? Like there's Brave Fencer Musashi, which is sort of like a play on him, right? Right, the swords, yeah. Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, Tokugawa Ieyasu, of course, those are all much later. Those are all like 1500s, 1600s. Yeah, I mean, there are others that are out there. Like Otomo no Otomaru. We mentioned him at the beginning of the stream. He's like the first guy that's ever given the title Shogun. He's pretty famous, historically speaking. I don't know. There's a lot of cool stuff. Masamune Date. Yeah, the one-eyed dragon. Yeah. Saito Hajime. Yeah. Are they more famous for conquering or being an exceptional samurai? Depending on which one, some of both. Miyamoto Musashi was not a conqueror. He wasn't even really the world's best samurai, if we're just being honest. He was just incredibly good at sword fighting. He was, if we're just being for real, he was kind of a crappy samurai. He was supposed to have fought so many, like, I think it was like 30 something duels by the time that he was 16, right? Or I can't remember what all the lore is about Musashi, but like he wasn't really good at organization. He wasn't really that good at battlefield tactics. Like he got hired by this particular lord to fight in this army against this fort full of Christians. This is during the Shimabara Rebellion, and he showed up at the battle, and he was walking around the outside of a outside of the fort, and a peasant threw a rock at him and hit him in the head, and so he had to sit out the battle. So I mean, he's not like the world's best soldier, but man, dude could fight, right? Dude could fight. He fought one dude with a boat oar. Like he showed up to the duel late and fought the guy with an oar and won. This crazy stuff, right? Yeah, Kojiro. Yeah. Crazy stuff. Lots of fun lore there. I don't know. To answer your question, Noel, I don't know. Gave him a paddling. Yeah. 60 duels from 13 to 27 years old. Yeah, just crazy amounts of stuff. Yeah, Oda Nobunaga and Tokugawa Ieyasu, those guys were conquerors. Nobunaga was brutal. He conquered the crap out of people. And of course, Tokugawa Ieyasu was the guy that finally ended the big 200-year civil war and managed to chill everybody back out. So, there's that. All right. The puppy is outside and just a-wooed at something. Let's go do a raid. Let's see. Who are we going to raid? Who haven't re-raided in a while? Ooh, let's go raid Noble Crumpet, who is playing Riven, which is one of my wife's favorite games. That sounds like a plan. Noble Crumpet is a variety streamer, plays games, does art, sometimes DMs tabletop RPGs. Really cool guy. Let's go say hey and watch him play the Riven remake, which is really, really pretty because I'm watching some of it happen right now. But thanks, everybody. Let me say thanks to the right people. Thanks, everybody that is a subscriber, including the people that subscribed today, like Matt and Kyle. Many thanks. All of the subscribers that you can see have the great little badge by their name, but let me also say thanks to patrons on Patreon. You can see your names there. Thank you so much for lending your support to the stream, and people that have sent books to help me with research. Thank you so much for supporting the channel as well. And as always, you can catch me on Patreon and the book command there if you would like to participate. But until next time, everybody, have a good one. Let's hit Noble Crumpet with adventure and some emotes if you got them. And until next time, have a good one.